I will warn you only once. Get ready. Many geographical facts that the world believes to be true are completely false and far more misleading than you ever imagined. And when you reach the end of these, you will understand exactly why millions of people continue to believe them. Let's start at number 35, the island that doesn't exist on Japan's official map. For decades, many Japanese grew up believing that their country officially had 6,852 islands. That figure appeared in textbooks, government documents, and even tourism publications. But in 2023, Japan's Geospatial Information Authority meticulously reviewed the count using modern digital technology and discovered something surprising. Japan actually has 14,125 islands. That is more than double what was previously thought. The error was neither political nor ideological, but technical. The previous count was based on 1987 maps with different criteria regarding the minimum size an island had to be considered one. This change did not alter the actual territory, but it did dismantle the popular belief that Japan always had a fixed, exact number of islands. Additionally, the revision included tiny islets in remote places like the Ogasawara Archipelago, more than 1,000 kilometers from Tokyo. The country did not gain new territory, but it officially gained thousands of recognized islands. Geography, even in ultra-technological nations, still depends on how we define and measure the world. 34. The northernmost point of the United States is not on continental Alaska. Many believe that the northernmost point of the United States lies at the northern tip of continental Alaska near Utqiagvik. However, the true northernmost point of the country is at Point Barrow if we speak only of the continental territory. If we consider all U.S. territories, the northernmost point is actually at Point Barrow for the continent, but the absolute extreme depends on small Arctic islands associated with the state. And here comes the nuance that breaks the popular idea. If we consider all U.S. territories, including dependencies in the Pacific, the most extreme latitude does not belong solely to the continent. The political geography of the United States is fragmented into islands and atolls scattered around the world, which causes its real extremes not to match those we usually learn in school. The simplified map taught us a half-truth. 33. Africa is not the largest continent in the southern hemisphere. It is common to hear that Africa is the great continent of the southern hemisphere. However, much of Africa lies in the northern hemisphere. In fact, the equator crosses countries such as Gabon and Kenya, leaving more than half of African territory above the equator. The largest continental mass entirely in the southern hemisphere is not Africa, but the continental mass of Australia. The mistake comes from mentally associating Africa with equatorial jungles and southern tropical savannas. But giant cities like Cairo are deeply in the northern hemisphere. This confusion becomes even more interesting when analyzing specific countries. For example, almost all of Angola's territory is in the southern hemisphere, while other large African countries are divided by the imaginary line. Africa is not the continent of the south, as we were made to believe. 32. The largest desert in the world is not the Sahara. You probably grew up hearing that the Sahara Desert is the largest desert on the planet. And yes, it is the largest hot desert, but the largest desert in the world is actually Antarctica. Technically, a desert is defined by annual precipitation amount, not temperature, and Antarctica receives less rainfall than the Sahara. Within this frozen continent, there are areas like the McMurdo Dry Valleys where it has not rained in millions of years. It is a landscape so arid that it is even used as an analog to study Mars. The mental image of desert equals sand and heat is powerful but scientifically incorrect. The planet's largest desert is white, not golden. 31. The highest capital city in the world is not La Paz. For a long time, it was repeated that the highest capital city in the world was La Paz. And although it is the administrative capital of Bolivia, it is not the constitutional capital. That title belongs to Sucre, which lies at a lower altitude. Besides, the title of highest capital depends on what type of capital we consider. La Paz is about 3,650 meters above sea level, but if we strictly speak of internationally recognized constitutional capitals, the ranking changes. This confusion mixes geography, politics, and historical tradition. So the categorical claim that La Paz is the highest capital in the world is actually a misleading simplification. Before continuing, make sure to subscribe and leave a like to keep discovering the strange and incredible geography of our entire planet. 30. The deepest point in the ocean is not where many believe. When talking about the ocean's deepest point, most mention the Mariana Trench in general, but the exact spot is the Challenger Deep within the Mariana Trench, which reaches approximately 10,984 meters deep. Not the entire trench has this extreme depth. It is a specific point measured with advanced technology. This nuance is important because for years the figures varied widely depending on the measurement method. Only modern expeditions, including manned submersibles, confirm the figure precisely. The idea that the entire trench has the same depth is false. The record belongs to a tiny spot within a gigantic oceanic system. 29. The smallest country in the world is not just a city. Many believe that Vatican City is simply a neighborhood within Rome with religious autonomy, but in reality it is a sovereign state recognized internationally with its own postal system, radio station, internet domain, and even security forces. It is not part of Italy politically. The confusion arises because it is entirely surrounded by Rome, but legally it has been an independent country since 1929. It has diplomatic agreements with over 180 nations. So no, it is not a special city within another city. It is the world's smallest fully sovereign state. 28. Mount Everest is not the tallest mountain measured from its base. Mount Everest is the highest mountain above sea level, at 8,848 meters. But if measured from base to peak, the record belongs to Mauna Kea in Hawaii. Most of Mauna Kea lies underwater, and from the ocean floor to its summit, it exceeds 10,200 meters. Popular perception is based on height relative to sea level, but that is only a convention. If the ocean did not cover Mauna Kea's base, its total size would clearly surpass Everest. So the roof of the world depends on the criterion you use for measuring. 27. Greenland is not as large as it appears. In many school maps, Greenland appears almost as big as Africa, but that illusion is a product of the Mercator projection, which distorts the size of regions near the poles. In reality, Africa is approximately 14 times larger than Greenland. The distortion becomes evident when using alternative projections like Gall-Peters. The visual myth has been so persistent that many people still believe Greenland is comparable in size to entire continents. The geography we see does not always match the real geography. It depends on the map we use. 26. The longest river in the world was not always the Nile. For decades, the Nile River was considered the longest on the planet. However, recent measurements analyzing specific tributaries in the Amazon region have sparked debate about whether the Amazon River might be longer depending on the exact starting point considered. The crucial detail lies in determining the most remote and continuous source of the river system. Expeditions in Peru have redefined possible sources of the Amazon, changing official figures by tens of kilometers. So the absolute claim that the Nile is the longest in the world is no longer unquestionable. It depends on the geographical criteria used. 25. The westernmost point of Europe is not on mainland Portugal. Many books and documentaries repeat that Europe's westernmost point is Cabo da Roca in Portugal. And if speaking strictly about continental European territory, that is correct. But if we consider all territories belonging to European countries, the westernmost point is on Flores Island in the Azores archipelago, which also belongs to Portugal. Flores is located much further west in the middle of the Atlantic and geographically even rests on the North American tectonic plate, not the Eurasian one. That is, the westernmost point of Europe is technically on the same plate as America. So the romantic image of tourists watching the sunset at Cabo da Roca as the end of Europe is more symbolic than geographically exact. 24. The largest lake in the world is not a normal lake. When we hear largest lake in the world, many imagine Lake Superior. However, the largest lake by surface area is the Caspian Sea. Although it carries the word sea, it is actually a closed lake without natural outlet to the ocean. The confusion comes from the name and its enormous size. It has more surface area than entire countries and borders 5 states. But it is not connected to the world ocean, classifying it as an endorheic lake. It is a perfect example of how historical names can distort our modern geographical perception. 2021. The driest desert in the world is not the Sahara. Although the Sahara dominates the collective imagination, the driest non-polar place on the planet is the Atacama Desert in northern Chile. In some specific zones, such as around the city of Arica, years can pass without measurable precipitation. The combination of the cold Humboldt Current and the natural barrier of the Andes creates an atmospheric trap preventing rain formation. There are areas where significant rain has not been documented for decades, so no, the world's most extreme desert is not in Africa but in South America. 20. The largest island in the world is not Australia. Many people answer Australia when asked what is the largest island in the world. But Australia is considered a continent. The largest island is Greenland. The key lies in the geological and tectonic definition. Australia rests on its own continental plate and is classified as an independent continental mass. Greenland, on the other hand, is a huge island situated on the North American plate, so the correct answer depends on understanding what is an island and what is a continent, not just size. 19. The most populous city in the world is not always the one you think. Many believe the most populous city on the planet is New York or even Shanghai, but depending on the metropolitan area, the record often belongs to Tokyo. The crucial detail is the definition. Are we talking about the municipality, continuous urban area, or metropolitan area? Tokyo, considering its extensive metropolitan region, exceeds 37 million inhabitants. Change the criterion and the winner changes. The correct answer is never as simple as one name. 18. The most active volcano in Europe is not on the continent. When talking about Europe's most active volcano, many mention Mount Vesuvius due to its history. However, the most active volcano is Mount Etna, located in Sicily. Etna erupts frequently and has had constant activity documented since ancient times. Although Sicily is politically in Europe, geographically it is an island south of the continent. Again, our mental image tends to associate records with the most famous places, not necessarily the most active ones. 17. The youngest country in the world was not always the last one you imagined to gain independence. Many assume the youngest country on the planet is Kosovo. But the most recently internationally recognized independent state is South Sudan, which obtained independence in 2011 after separating from Sudan. The confusion arises because international recognition does not always coincide with the Declaration of Independence. In the case of South Sudan, the process included a formal referendum and near-unanimous acceptance by the UN. So no, the global political map changed more recently in Africa than in Europe. 16. The coldest inhabited place on the planet is not at the South Pole. It is common to think that the coldest inhabited place in the world is in Antarctica, but the record for extreme temperatures in permanent settlements belongs to Oymyakon in Siberia. In this small Russian village, temperatures below -60 degrees Celsius have been recorded. Unlike Antarctic scientific bases, Oymyakon has a permanent civilian population, schools, and everyday life. It is a reminder that climatic extremes are not always where we imagine, but in remote corners where people live despite all. 15. The most isolated place on the planet is not Antarctica. When thinking of the most remote site on Earth, almost everyone imagines Antarctica, a frozen and seemingly endless continent. But the most isolated point in the ocean is the so-called Point Nemo, officially known as the Pacific Pole of Inaccessibility. The nearest inhabited place to that point is not a polar base, but Ducie Island, part of the remote Pitcairn Archipelago. Point Nemo is located more than 2,600 kilometers from any landmass. In fact, at certain times, the closest humans to that point are not on solid ground but aboard the International Space Station orbiting above it. So no, the most isolated place on the planet is not the South Pole nor a Siberian tundra, but an invisible spot in the Pacific where the ocean dominates in all directions for thousands of kilometers. 14. The country that spans more than one continent is not only Turkey. Many believe the classic example of a bicontinental country is Turkey, with Istanbul divided between Europe and Asia. However, there is an even more surprising case, Indonesia. Although we associate it exclusively with Southeast Asia, Indonesia has territory in Oceania. The western half of the island of New Guinea, known as Papua, belongs to the country and geographically lies on the oceanic continent. That is, Indonesia not only spans thousands of islands, but crosses a real continental border. The political map we learned simplifies these complex realities. 13. The city with the most bridges in the world is not Venice. It is easy to assume that Venice holds the world record for bridges. Its image is inseparably linked to canals and historic walkways. However, the city with the most bridges is Hamburg in Germany. Hamburg has over 2,500 bridges, greatly surpassing Venice, which has around 400. The reason is its complex network of canals, rivers, and port areas connected to the Elbe River. The tourist perception has eclipsed the statistical reality. Venice is iconic, but Hamburg is the true capital of bridges worldwide. 12. The highest navigable lake in the world is not the only one in its category. Lake Titicaca is famous for being the highest navigable lake in the world, located over 3,800 meters above sea level between Peru and Bolivia. But here is a detail often omitted. It is not the highest lake where a vessel may navigate, but the highest that allows large-scale commercial navigation regularly. There are higher lakes where small boats can float temporarily, but Titicaca maintains permanent routes and populations dependent on lake transport. In specific places like the island of the Sun, daily life revolves around the lake. So the simplified claim hides a key technical distinction. It is not the highest lake with boats, but the highest with sustained commercial navigation. 11. The country with the most active volcanoes is neither Japan nor Iceland. When we think of active volcanoes, we usually imagine Japan or Iceland. However, the country with the most active volcanoes is Indonesia. Indonesia lies on the Pacific Ring of Fire and is home to more than 120 active volcanoes. In islands like Java or Sumatra, volcanic activity is part of the daily landscape. This extreme concentration makes the archipelago the country with the highest number of active volcanoes on the planet. Popular narratives tend to focus on the most media-famous cases, but the real record is in Southeast Asia. Remember to subscribe and leave your like to keep learning incredible facts about every corner of our extraordinary world. 10. The easternmost point of the United States is not on the East Coast. If you are asked, what is the easternmost point of the United States, you would most likely imagine a lighthouse on Maine's coast looking toward the Atlantic. And yes, if we speak strictly in terms of conventional east longitude within the continental map, West Quaddyhead usually takes that symbolic title. But if we look at the planet as it really is, a sphere divided by arbitrary longitude lines, the easternmost point of all the United States is actually in Alaska, specifically on one of the Aleutian Islands near Semisopochnoi Island. This is because the Aleutian chain crosses the 180-degree meridian, the international dateline. By doing so, some of its islands are technically in the eastern hemisphere. That is, the country's westernmost state also contains its easternmost point. A single territory completely breaks the linear idea we have of the flat classroom map. 9. The rainiest place in the world is not the Amazon. When we think of extreme rainfall, we imagine the Amazon jungle. However, the historical record for average annual precipitation belongs to Mawsynram, a small village in Meghalaya state, northeastern India. There, more than 11,000 millimeters of rain fall annually on average. The phenomenon is explained by a very specific geographic combination. Monsoon winds loaded with moisture from the Bay of Bengal hit the Khasi Hills directly, forcing the air to rise sharply and release almost constant torrential rains during the wet season. It is not a huge tropical jungle, but a specific village on an elevated plateau that holds the record. Popular exaggeration simplifies the phenomenon. The reality is much more localized and extreme. 8. The country with the most lakes in the world is not Finland, though close. Finland is known as the land of 1,000 lakes and is often said to be the country with the most lakes on Earth. However, the country that actually leads the ranking is Canada. Canada has more lakes than the rest of the world combined, including giants like Lake Superior and Great Bear Lake. It is estimated to have more than 2 million lakes, many formed by the action of ancient glaciers that sculpted the land during the last ice age. Finland has many indeed, but Canada's scale is simply enormous. The tourist label has overshadowed the real geological magnitude. 7. The hottest temperature ever recorded was not in the Sahara. For years it was believed that the record for the highest temperature in history occurred in the Sahara Desert. However, the record officially validated by the World Meteorological Organization belongs to Death Valley, specifically Furnace Creek in the United States. There, 56.7 degrees Celsius was reached in 1913. Although modern measurements approach similar figures, that record remains officially accepted. The myth of the Sahara as the hottest place on the planet is powerful, but the specifically validated point is in California, in a desert basin below sea level that amplifies heat extremely. 6. The country with the most pyramids in the world is not Egypt. When talking about pyramids, we automatically think of Egypt and the iconic Giza structures. However, the country with the most pyramids is Sudan. In regions like Meroe, there are more than 200 Nubian pyramids built by the ancient kingdom of Kush. They are smaller and steeper than Egyptian pyramids, making them less famous, but numerically surpass those of the northern neighbor. The historical narrative focused on Egypt left an impressive archaeological landscape in the shadow that completely changes the popular statistic. 5. The longest border in the world does not separate Russia from China. Many believe the longest land border on the planet is between Russia and China, but in reality, the longest international border is that shared between Canada and the United States. It extends for more than 8,800 kilometers if we also count the section between Alaska and Canada. It is also one of the most peaceful and least militarized borders in the world. Intuition leads us to think of Eurasia due to its size and historical tensions, but the real record is found in North America. 4. A country without rivers is not an urban myth. It may sound incredible, but there is a country without permanent rivers, Saudi Arabia. Although it has wadis, dry channels that only carry water after occasional rains, it does not possess permanent rivers that flow year-round. Its water supply depends heavily on underground aquifers and desalination plants on the Red Sea and Persian Gulf coasts. The idea that every country has at least one river is simply false. In hyper-arid regions, hydrology works completely differently. 3. The highest mountain in Japan is not where most tourists see it. Everyone associates Japan's highest point with the iconic Mount Fuji, which is correct in absolute terms. But what many do not know is that the highest accessible point of the mountain does not always coincide with the perfect image seen from nearby lakes. Fuji's crater has several peaks on its rim, and the exact highest point is on Kengamine Peak, not the symmetrical center shown on postcards. It is a small yet precise nuance. Even within a famous mountain, the record belongs to a specific point, not the silhouette we recognize from afar. 2. The continent with the most countries is not Asia. Asia is the largest and most populous continent. So many assume it also has the greatest number of countries, but the continent with the most sovereign states is Africa. Africa has 54 countries recognized by the UN, surpassing Asia. The political fragmentation of Africa, resulting from colonial processes and borders drawn in the 19th century, produced a larger number of states than any other continent. Territorial scale does not always translate into the number of nations. 1. The place where the most countries converge at a single point is not in Europe. Many believe the most complex border crossings are in Central Europe. However, one of the most fascinating points on the planet is in Africa, where the borders of Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, and Namibia converge. This quadruple point is located near the confluence of the Zambezi and Chobe rivers. Although there was debate for years about whether it was truly a single point or two very close triple points, today the existence of this quadruple crossing is widely accepted. It is not in the European heartland nor a historic capital, but in a riverine area of southern Africa, a precise geographical detail that dismantles the continental intuition many took for granted. After learning these 35 false geographical facts, tell us, had anyone made you believe any of them, or another false fact you want to debunk? Leave your answers in the comments and let's see how many of us chose the same ones. And speaking of choosing, the best thing you can do is watch the video below. That way you will become true experts in geography. But before you go, don't forget to subscribe and hit like so we can keep learning together. See you in the video.